Okay, it's recording. Hello, welcome to the podcast. Thank you, everyone who's tuning in. This is my first and very special guest, my very close friend, Tess, the teacher.
Yeah.
Uh, so we met, I think, a few months back on WhatsApp through a Zoom call. Actually, we were planning a Zoom call, and then we just struck it off, and we've been friends ever since.
Yeah.
So, welcome to the podcast, Tess.
Hi.
So,
Thank you for having me.
my pleasure. I just firstly would like to say thank you that you accepted the request for the podcast because I wasn't really sure. Because Tess, I want everyone to know, is a super busy human being because she teaches, and I have to say, I have not been a student of hers, but I wish I was because just the way
Aw.
I hear her talk about her students and everything and how she interacts with them is genuinely nice. And so today I'd actually like you to, firstly introduce yourself like a bit.
Okay. So my name's Tess. I'm 26. I'm originally from Canada, but I moved to Israel about 5 years ago. And since I was a kid, I wanted to be a teacher. Technically, I wanted to be a singer, and then I was like, no, choose something more realistic. and and I always really liked kids, even as a little kid. What else about me? I'm married. I live with my best friend.
Whom
I
she
like
married,
all sorts of
so
what?
so that we're clear. Like you live with your best friend, whom you married, so we're clear.
Oh yeah, that's true. When I say I live with my best friend, I mean my husband. And he's originally Israeli, so we spent a few years long distance. And while he was in the army, so that's a whole other story. And aside from that, in general, like I'm just a very creative person, and that's one of the things I really like about teaching is I like to sing and I like to act and I like to dance and I like to play guitar and all
Oh my
those
God, I didn't
things.
know you took your guitar to class. That's amazing.
Yeah, I started with the guitar and then I realized it's too large to carry. You don't realize that teachers carry so much stuff with them to and from school. So at a certain point, I was like, you know what, it's fine. I have a ukulele. I'll just teach myself how to use that. So I started taking
That's
the
so
ukulele
sweet.
class instead. Yeah. Um, and yeah, that's one of the things I love about being a teacher, a lot of creative stuff. And also I'm like a people person. So I really, when kids are a lot, but I really do like working with people and not just like working behind a desk all day. So
Nice.
yeah.
And plus, we have a common interest of animation and Disney. So,
Yes, definitely. I was today when I was getting ready for the podcast, I was listening to my Disney favorite playlist, and that one, like a when will my life begin? As I was like getting
oh,
ready, and I was like, when will the podcast begin?
oh my God. But it's just, I feel the same because several times in the morning I feel a bit hyped up and I'm like, it needs a theme song. And then I am always playing the one from Frozen uh, for the first time in forever.
Yeah,
That's the best song to get up to in the morning. So,
so good. Yeah. I could
okay.
sit and talk about Disney for hours. They're very happy.
I know. We're nerds, basically.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
firstly, I would like to congratulate you on getting married. How when did you feel you were ready to transition into that phase of your life?
Um, I'll be honest. So Yaniv and I met when we were teenagers. And then we had like 2 years where we weren't together, we weren't dating. He was living in Israel, I was living in Canada. But once we did start dating, it was pretty obvious to both of us that like this was like, the search was over. That like, I was like, you're my best friend. I love being around you. We are like, I think partially because of long distance, like we are very obsessed with each other. Like he goes to work and it's hard for me to not spend part of the day with him, which is just like really cute, but also kind of silly because like we're adults. And that's what you do. You don't spend all day with the person that you love. But basically from the very beginning, I knew that I wanted us to get married. I knew, you know, I was like, I'm ready. I really wanted to have kids very early too. I wanted to have a child by 26. I'm 26 right now, and Yaniv had never had a girlfriend before me. So he was in a very different place. And he's like, I want to be with you forever, but I can't imagine what it's like to get married, because that seems like an adult thing. So, you know, like we waited a few years just to like be safe. We were engaged for a really long time too, because of the Corona stuff, and things kept getting like postponed. But I think that for us specifically, it was just like, it kind of just seems like a technicality getting married. Like the longer that we were engaged for, the more I was just like, oh, it's so silly that I keep calling you my fiance. Like you're my partner. And at the end of the day, marriage is more like a title. Like it's kind of arbitrary. It doesn't totally matter. It does matter to me because I grew up a certain way and it like symbolizes something for me. And also it just feels silly to be with someone for 7 years and be like, this is my boyfriend. You know,
I get
and it's
that.
like, husband just implies a certain level of connection. Although obviously, like, you know, in recent years, I've realized that calling someone your partner is just as impactful. It really depends on who you're talking to.
True.
But I think in general, I always knew that Yaniv and I were like end game, people say.
Nice.
And he knew that too. So it was very much just like a matter of time. When I moved to Israel, because we were in a long distance relationship. So we were long distance for 2 years. And we knew that I was going to move to Israel. And moving to Israel was like me saying we're getting married. You know, you don't move to another country for someone.
So that was the start of when you were like, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I said to him, you know, Yaniv, you proposed to me. He proposed to me maybe like two years ago or something. Oh my God, more than 2 years ago now because of Corona. In November 2018, I think he proposed. But I moved to Israel in 2016. Okay. And I said to him, like, moving to Israel was me proposing to you. You know, I did it first. Yeah. I think that kind of answered the question. I'll try not to ramble too much.
No. It's fine. It's a podcast, basically. Yeah. But yeah, because I actually today morning, I woke up and then I saw yesterday's group messages and I saw Yaniv and I was like, I need to add him immediately. And I started speaking with him like on text. And so yeah, Yaniv is just like, to be honest, my first impression of Yaniv was like, I always had the pirate impression of him. And so, but he's such a gentle soul, like from the inside. You wouldn't, like when you see him, you wouldn't think of him in that sense, like in the first impression. And so.
Really, it's really interesting because both Yaniv and I were like bullied as kids. We were both overweight. For like most of his life, he didn't feel comfortable in his own skin. So now when people meet him, I think they get a very different like first impression of him from what he thinks he's showing other people.
Because when I first,
yeah.
Yes. So when I first met him like on the Zoom call, my first impression was, okay, I got the vibe that he was a tech guy, by the way, but I was more of certain that he was kind of an entrepreneur of some kind. Like you could get that confident vibe of him. And I was like, okay, I wasn't intimidated, but I could get the vibe. And so, but then when he spoke and how he interacted, that was so sweet and gentle. It was like, really? You could instantly warm up to him. It was genuinely amazing.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love. You know, when I have this kind of idea of like, when you think about your friends, I always think about them in different realms. But one of the things is, what kind of parties can you take this friend to? How do they interact? You know, you have some people you can take them somewhere and not have to worry about them. They could know none of your friends and you can take them and they're going to get along with everyone. And Yaniv is one of those people that even though he's like relatively shy, everyone loves him. Like
That's so
everyone,
sweet.
I've never introduced him to someone and gotten anything except for like, oh my God, he's so sweet and you're so smart. And like, yeah, he's a huge, when you said the thing about technology, like Yaniv likes knowing things. He's curious. He likes knowing things just to know things. So like the number of useless facts that he just knows. And it's interesting stuff, you know, like I'm also like a dork. So I appreciate when he like pauses a movie to talk about like how they shot, like to be like, did you notice that that was one shot and it was from this to this and they used this color to symbolize this, and it's, he didn't study this, it's just something that he finds interesting.
So amazing.
Yeah.
So, coming back, as you said, when you moved from Canada, you obviously had to undergo, I wouldn't call it a shock, but more of a surprise, a cultural surprise. So
Yeah.
how do you find adjusting to it different from adjusting to like when, let's just say when you were in Canada? Like how did you find the culture there and how do you find the culture in Israel?
So I think that first off, I'm really lucky that like when I made Aliyah, that's what you call moving to Israel, because it's like a Jewish, it's called like the right of return. It's a whole process.
Okay.
So when I made Aliyah, before I moved, I was lucky that I visited Israel many times. My dad was born in Israel and my grandparents live here. I have two older siblings that are in their like late 30s, early 40s, and they also both live here with their kids. And I used to visit every single summer. It's one of the reasons why Yaniv and I were able to meet, because I have a connection with Israel. So before I made Aliyah, this always sounds so weird to people. I made a list of all the things that I like and hate about Israel. I knew I was going to move. This list wasn't to help me decide whether or not to move. This list was to remind me how much shit I was going to have to deal with once I got to Israel, because definitely for people moving from other countries, you would have a very strong culture shock in Israel, but especially from Canada to Israel, there are some things that are just so different. So I was prepared for a lot of negative things. And when I say negative, I'm not talking about bombing or terrorism or racism or any stuff like that. It was more that, you know, a lot of things don't work properly in Israel. Like really basic stuff, like just machines, like the buses, schedules, going to the doctor, like everything is harder than it needs to be.
Okay.
And I knew it would be like that, but it was still difficult to actually deal with the process. And another thing that people say in general is that Israelis are very angry or very impatient, which is true. They are, but the way that I see it is like, I actually did, I'll try to come back to this, but I basically, when I first moved here, I did a master's. And I did a research project all on the experience of North Americans moving to Israel. Wow. And everyone had the same experience. So like Israelis are angry and impatient and noisy. And they always think that someone's trying to like, am I allowed to swear? Sorry. Someone's trying to mess with them. Okay. They always think that someone's trying to mess with them. But on the other side, Israelis are also so friendly. And they have so much energy, so much energy. They work hard, party hard, you know, like there's, you know, they'll help you for no reason, you know, and all these like people that had moved had told me stories about being in the market and not having enough money to pay for their groceries and someone just offering to pay for their food. All sorts of stories like that. People that were invited over to Shabbat dinner 3 minutes after meeting someone. I've had experiences like that, you know, where I remember my phone died and I was in the middle of Tel Aviv and I didn't know how to get home. And it was obvious that I was lost. It was written all over my face. And in Canada, people are very nice, but maybe someone wouldn't have like come up to me and started an interaction, you know, they would have been more than happy to help if I had asked for help.
Okay.
But, you know, I had 3 different people come up to me and be like, oh, are you lost? Do you need help? And then when I didn't fully understand them, they even were like, like Mishum Adabel, like, does someone speak English to help this girl? So there's definitely a vibe here of like, just as much as people can be impatient and angry, it goes the other way too. They just feel very strongly. So I had an idea of that before I moved, but obviously still moving here was a big culture shock. And the thing that I say from Canada to Israel is that in Canada, we are very, I don't want to say PC, but we're more aware of how we talk to people.
Okay.
Like, it's more, you're supposed to be polite. There are certain like ways that you're supposed to interact with people, and we follow those social rules. And in Israel, that doesn't really exist. Like, if someone doesn't like you, chances are you're going to know. If someone bugs you in line in Israel, like, Israelis stand up for themselves. They have a lot of confidence. They have a lot of like the children here have so much freedom and so much independence. Like kids that are 7 years old taking the bus to go to school.
Wow.
And it's such a different culture from what I grew up in. I think it was definitely a shock, but it's more, it was more for me that, like, because I grew up in a culture that's very sensitive to how we speak to each other, I'm a little sensitive to how people interact with me. And in Israel, people just don't even think about that. So I think that would probably be the hardest, when I find myself in interactions with people where I'm kind of like, oh, I'm getting offended. And it's not because anyone's trying to be rude. It's just because I expect to be spoken to a certain way, especially as a teacher. Oh my goodness. The
Students.
you'd think a country that has the army, where everyone has to go to the army, you'd think that they would have an understanding of authority and how to respect authority, but they really don't. They really, really don't. Yeah.
So do you think the shock of the cultural, I guess, differences has settled for you now? Like, are you adjusted to how it is now, or are you still adjusting?
I would say, okay, so I'm here 5 years, and I would say that there's certain, I've definitely adjusted in terms of like understanding what the culture is, like you can tell from the way I'm talking about it that I have a certain kind of narrative to explain why Israelis are the way they are. I think that, like, there are definitely parts of me, like, when I drive, I'm closer to, I think, Israeli than I am to Canadian. Like, Israelis love their horn. They don't signal. They just love to be like, I am here. Look at me.
Wow.
Let me through.
So it's like a sign language through horns.
Yeah. And for me, in Canada, it's very different. But now I'm not honking my horn constantly, but it's more like I'm like waiting. I'm like, just give me a reason. Just give me a reason to honk my horn. Oh, please. So there's definitely moments like that where I've definitely kind of given into it a little bit. But I think in general, I had a realization that for me, I like to be someone who's sensitive. I like to be someone who's sensitive to how I speak to others and to other people's feelings. And it's definitely been an adjustment, thinking about how can I still be me within this culture and not be in a stress between those two things clashing.
Or like, have you ever felt that like you could have been in conflict with your own self because of this? Like,
I have been in conflict with my own self because of this. I think when I first met Aliyah, especially with making friends in Hebrew, I just felt, especially cultural things, like Israelis are really late for everything. Like, nothing starts on time. But, like, I finally managed to make friends, and I had a party. And in Canada, I used to have like really big parties, not because I had a million friends, because I was always like, if you want to bring a friend, go ahead. The more the merrier. Like, there's always room for one more. And here, I remember my first party, and I spent all this time decorating and planning. Like, I was very extra. I was very excited. And so many people came really late, like hours late. Okay. A lot of people just didn't even show up. Some of them just didn't message. And a lot of them were Yaniv's friends, and Yaniv is Israeli, right? So I said to him, like, this is so disrespectful. Like, I took time out of my busy schedule to like get alcohol and like make a plan and, do all these things. And then none of these people are showing up. And that had like really hurt me. It really offended me. And it was something that all of these people are Israelis. They didn't realize that they were sending that message.
Okay.
They didn't realize.
They didn't
And
intend
it
to,
took
I
a lot
guess,
of
like in
work.
that sense.
What?
They didn't intend to, like, they wouldn't have necessarily thought
Yeah,
that you would have thought of it like that.
exactly. It was, and that's like such a good example of the culture differences where I was like, you're sending a message that you don't realize you're sending because like
Wow.
I'm reading it a certain way. So that I think was one of the hardest things is like being like, okay, I want to make friends and I want to keep like, it's important for me that people, respect my time. So showing up on time or showing up not 3 hours late, like I had someone that showed up once to a party at like 2 a.m. and everyone was already gone. And then they wanted to hang out. And I was like, listen, like, I'm happy to see you, but I want to sleep because I've been with people since 9 o'clock. You showing up now is like
It's like,
kind of to
yeah,
me insulting, you know? So I think it's definitely socially. There were moments where I was like, do I want to change who I am? Do I want to decide that it's okay for people to be late because that's the way it is? And that it's okay for people to not message and for this and this? Or do I want to keep some of who I am, keep some of that like, general respect and just communicate that with all my friends and let them know that the kind of space that I want to create is one that is still Israeli, but is also my own.
true.
And it's definitely been a learning curve. I've lost some friends, because I'm just like, I completely respect that we see things differently. But for me, being a good friend is also like understanding each other's needs. And I
That is
think
very
that's
true.
definitely been a big thing for me where I'm like, how much do I want to change the understanding of the culture? And how much am I okay with keeping? Because for me, it's totally fine if people come late, but I want it to not be acceptable to come like 2 or 3 hours late or just text me. Just
Yeah,
like,
I get that.
yeah.
So, coming to another point I'd like to make is that I was officially late for my own podcast.
Yeah.
So, hearing this, I feel like really, oh my God, I feel really bad now.
It's okay. It's okay. It's fine. Like I was at home
Yeah,
and what before we started recording, I said to you, hey, I just wanted to let you know these are my feelings. And
exactly.
it's okay. I'm not holding it against you because you didn't know. And now I communicated it with you. And now if we do something again and you're half an hour late, then I'll probably be a little annoyed. But but like in terms of the first time, that's the thing. It's a communication thing for me, right?
True.
Like we've communicated and now everything's fine. And also, that I like talking to you. So
Yeah,
it's okay. You're my buddy.
thank you. You too.
Yeah.
And I would like to say that I kind of understand the thing about being late because I relate with that. Being an Indian, we are not usually the most punctual people. You can ask anyone. It doesn't have to be people living in India, but it can be Indians from anywhere else. I so our mutual friend Salman, he had an Indian friend
Yeah.
who was always late. And he asked me, like, is that an Indian thing? And I was like, I think so, yeah, it's an Indian thing. Because I don't know, we just seem to be like we'll just be on the dot though. We won't be that late. Like if we say,
Mhm.
if you give us like you say be here at 9 p.m., we're gonna text you and say no, we are not gonna be here at 9 p.m. We're gonna be at 9:30. And we'll be on time at 9:30, but we're always gonna say that we're gonna be not at that time but some other time.
Yeah.
So I actually understand that. And I would also like to ask whether you have any advice for people like I feel like there are more people moving into different not just countries but different cultures
Mhm.
for work, for study, or even, for
Yeah.
just going and visiting the country. Do you have any advice on how they should maintain their, I don't know,
Mhm.
their level of comfort and how they should approach the cultural differences that they go to, any place that they go to? like based on your experience?
I think the biggest thing that I would say about moving anywhere, visiting also, but specifically moving, is that nothing is going to be harder for you than the language. Like
Okay.
I'm really lucky that I understood Hebrew when I moved here. I couldn't speak fluently, but I had something.
Okay.
And even then, it was a huge struggle. And even today, 5 years in, when I can speak quite well, I still find myself feeling unable to communicate who I am as a person. So I think that like making an effort to start learning some form of the language is going to give you a lot of comfort and also allow you to actually reach out to people and ask for help. Because I feel like in most countries, not every country, but for example, Israel, people are open to tourists. People are happy to help if you need some help. But you definitely need to ask. And moving to any country is a crazy adjustment. And I know for me, like I have family here. I had Yaniv, my parents came to visit 3 months after I moved. And it was still the hardest thing I've ever done. I still was like, oh my God, it is so difficult to live on my day to day. But also, when you move to a country, you have to do certain technical things, getting health insurance, going to the ministry and like getting what's it called? Like an ID. There's a lot of like actual technical things that you have to do that are so difficult and make you feel like the country doesn't actually want you there because it's so hard. And so much of that just comes down to language. The first thing I would say is if you can invest time in learning the language or find a friend who knows the language, have someone that can be your buddy to help you out with things. Sure. Aside from that, like obviously like getting out as much as possible, going and trying new things, trying new foods, like actually experiencing the culture, because I know that for many people, our instinct is kind of to do what feels comfortable. When I first moved here, I was in a program with mostly English speakers. And for that first year that I was living here, I was in a dorm and I was with my friends and I felt really safe and I had a great time. But then the year ended, the program ended. Everyone else who wasn't planning on staying moved back to the US. And here I was a year into living here. My Hebrew wasn't that good. I didn't really know the country very well because I'd spent most of my time in this little bubble. And now since then, my best experiences have been, pushing myself out of my comfort zone, as we talked about through Yes Theory, like seeking discomfort.
True.
And yeah, like really pushing yourself to do things that maybe you otherwise wouldn't feel comfortable doing. And the biggest thing also in Israel is that because of the weather, so many people are outside. There's a lot of communal public spaces, which we don't really have in Canada. A lot of the spaces, aside from like maybe some parks, if you want to go inside and do stuff, it usually involves money. You're going into a shopping mall, you're going to a movie theater, you're going to go to the skating rink where you have to pay, Here, there's people outside everywhere, just living their lives and just being outside. Already increases your chances. Yeah, it already increases your chances of meeting people, of seeing things, like there's a lot of Israelis that ride scooters, like we have like a lot of electric transportation in Israel. Okay. So it also means we have people on scooters, we have people on bikes, we have people skateboarding everywhere, and there's communities for all of those things. Nice. So, really just like being out, seeing things, knowing the language, and being open to people. I feel like it's pretty standard. I feel like it's pretty standard advice. But that's
no, I feel like this advice is not usually taken, like actually registering in most people's heads, because the impact of having to make the decision first to be like, okay, I'm moving somewhere, and in all the, so in Hindi we call the word halchal, which means all the chaos of moving and everything. It's halchal. Mm-hmm. So chaos is halchal. I was about to say halchal, but in all the chaos of moving and having to decide for so many things, you often miss out, and then you feel like, okay, am I not fitting in here? Like, what do I have to do? So I feel like this is really some advice that people need to let sink in them, to know that the best thing to do is seek discomfort, as we have the motto from Yes Theory, and also learn the language. It's genuinely
Yeah.
important. So
Even just trying to learn the language, because then you'll meet, if you take a class or if you are trying to talk to people, you will find other people who don't totally know the language, and you guys can be in the same boat together.
yeah, true.
I think one last thing I would say is there is a ridiculous number of online communities in most countries. I think it's kind of hard to kind of get into them, but once you find them, you find, for example, there's something in Israel called Secret Tel Aviv. It's a Facebook group with English speakers in it for Tel Aviv. And people will just post about stuff that happens to them there. People will also post being like, hey, I'm going to the mall today. Does anyone want to join me? So there's stuff like that. I've made a few friends through groups like that.
So
I think
interesting.
me finding the Yes Fam WhatsApp group a few months ago has also really changed. Like now I know some more people in Israel that like I definitely wouldn't have known Salman, who lives in Pki'in, which is
Yeah.
very north, and I've only ever been there once, and it was for like a weekend away with Yaniz's family as like a cultural experience. Like we went to go
Wow.
eat food, and it was a vacation. It didn't even feel like it was part of Israel. So now it's really interesting to find myself talking every single day with someone who lives there and trying to convince him to come to the city.
Salman, if you're listening, you need to.
Yeah, it looks like I'm gonna have to go up to him. But basically, I think that also just, the learning the language, being outside, and then also if you have a specific interest, look online. It's a small country, but there's a lot of people here. And I think that goes for everything. Like there's online communities all over the world. So if you have something specific, you will find people that like what you like. Even if it's just Disney. Even if it's just Disney being like, hey, who wants to go see the next Pixar or Disney movie with me? Once Corona's over,
Oh yeah. But speaking of Corona, how have you stayed sane during the entire COVID? I don't feel that it's over yet, but I feel the major part of people accepting that okay, this is how it is. Like we read this in
Yeah.
textbooks on pandemics and stuff. Can't believe we are gonna be in history. Like we are the generation that has been through a pandemic.
Yes.
So
First off, I just think that, yeah, we learn in history about like major world events, right? Aside from like world wars, there's nothing that's really affected most of the world that I can think of, right? There isn't like anything that all of us have had to go through together. So that alone just blows my mind. Because for every generation, it's not just us, right? Even for my parents, my parents are like in their they're almost in their 70s. And for them still having this kind of experience at the end of their lives is still greatly shaping their views on things. Like my dad's originally Israeli, but they moved to Canada before my older siblings were born, about like 40 years ago. And my dad never wanted to come back to Israel. He visits all the time, but he's like, it's comfortable in Canada. Things work, you have a nice house, everything is, it's less stressful. There's an energy in Israel that's both positive and negative, but it's like a buzz that you always feel, which can be a lot. Now after this whole Corona thing, they're planning to move to Israel.
oh my God, really?
Because now that it really put things in perspective for my parents about, traveling. My parents usually travel here every year, multiple times a year. My dad's parents are still alive. So for him, it's suddenly like, okay, I have one foot in this country and one foot in other country. And the virus has really made me more aware of how limiting that is.
Wow.
So, and also how different our countries are, because here I am, I'm 26, I'm fully vaccinated. I have been fully vaccinated with my 2 shots for 2 weeks already. And my dad is 69 and he still has not gotten his shot in Canada.
Oof.
And
Wow.
it just blows my mind, especially because like, when is Israel ever on top of their stuff? It's very, very crazy to me. Yaniv is getting his 2nd vaccine today, but everyone else in my family, everyone in Israel has it, unless they don't believe in the vaccine. let's not start on
Oh,
that. But
that was a crazy
everyone
time
has
when
it.
months ago people are like, we don't believe in COVID. And like,
Oh my goodness.
yo, there's numbers on the screen.
Oh God, don't even get me started, dude. My older sister didn't believe in COVID. She believed in a conspiracy theory about
Oh,
COVID, that it was like a government, that all the governments, oh, it just suddenly started raining here, slash hailing. Anyway, so she believed that like it was all like a conspiracy by the governments of the world to like kill the population, like to get rid of the more undesirable population, like the older people or the sicker people or whatever. And now she's the only person in my family that I haven't seen for months on months. She will not get the vaccine.
oh my, she still believes it?
But it's also because she's also anti like flu shot. She's anti like.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I get that.
I think it's one of those times where it's really easy to feel divided from people. And especially in Israel, you know, we've had very high numbers because Israelis, another cultural thing, is Israelis don't like to follow rules. And I keep making jokes to Yaniv about how this whole all this corona stuff really feels like what happens in an Israeli classroom. The teacher has no control, and she keeps telling the students what the rules are, but the students do whatever they want. And because there's 40 of them and one teacher, at the end of the day, nothing happens, you know, like the kids do whatever they want. And that's why I see the police, you know, like they made laws about us. Like our most recent lockdown was a joke. Most of our lockdowns have been a joke, but the most recent was just seriously like everyone was still living their lives like normal. And we were supposed to not be allowed out further from our house than 1,000 meters. So, you know, it's like this idea of like, well, there's a rule, don't talk when the teacher is talking. But even if you break the rule, nothing's going to happen. So everyone's breaking the rules all around you. I was like, the cops are like the teachers that no one will listen to. And it is so weird watching the government try and control a population that isn't used to listening. And also that they kind of also think that it's a little bit bullshit. Like the Israelis are like, oh, it's fine, it's fine. I had a few friends that are not really my friends anymore because they didn't wear masks and they were having parties and they were doing all these things. And I was just like, do you not care? Like, are your personal freedoms more important than someone's health? Like, I can't understand it. And in Israel, personal freedom is really, really important to people, like really important to people. So yeah, there's been a lot of problems. Even now that we have the vaccine, there's still people that are refusing to get vaccinated. And I understand human rights. I understand that it's people's, you know, it's your body. If you want to be locked away and not be infecting anyone, then go ahead, don't get vaccinated. Be at home. Have yourself your own quarantine. But if you're planning on interacting with people and risking other people's lives, you know, that's when it starts to get a little complicated.
Here we are just starting the thing, like all frontline workers got the shot and now they're starting above 45, like people above 45 are getting their vaccines and stuff. So that's fun. So it's interesting to see how every place deals with this situation on their own, like versus how we would assume that they would deal with. Because for us, like I personally feel we have a very high image of how we would react to like if you had told me a year back that bro there's gonna be like a thing like this, there's gonna be COVID, you're gonna be stuck at home, not gonna do anything, like how are you gonna react? I would be like I'm gonna be fine, I'm gonna be fine. I wouldn't like I think we have a really high level of fake acknowledging that we are going to be fine until we're actually in it, and then we realize, oh no, this is horrible. because it
Mhm.
went like, I remember when the things like the lockdown started, it was just like every government being like, it's just gonna be for like a few days, a month or something,
Yeah.
and then it's gonna open up, everything's fine, it's chill. But then when you realize even the government has no clue about when anything of this is gonna end. Like even now,
Mhm.
we are technically still like maintaining so many things that we wouldn't have in a normal day and age. And so I feel like it really taught us to really be humble and to understand everyone else's perspective too. Like it's just
Yeah.
fascinating to me. And I feel like COVID has brought everyone as humans together closer in a weird sense, that we have this common thing that we have been through, and we can share this. Like it's going to be like generations later, we're going to tell grandkids, like, we have been through this. You don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So,
It's very, have you seen all those like memes and stuff where the grandparents are telling us about how they had to fight in wars, and we're like, oh, I had to be inside by myself with food and Netflix and alcohol for months, and I couldn't work. I was just on vacation for months in my house. Like it's it's a crisis of our time, and it's very interesting because for me, this idea of like, what's the hardest thing for our generation to do? Nothing.
that's actually
Nothing.
surprising.
Feeling like we're not progressing. I know definitely that this before the corona was the most settled I'd felt in Israel. The most settled that I'd felt. I finally had friends. I had a routine. I would see people. I would have events at our house. I wasn't teaching in schools anymore. I was teaching as a private tutor, and I loved it. And I was working for myself, and I had everything. I was like, finally, after 4 years of living here, I've built my life up from scratch. And then the corona happened,
Oh,
and I had to stop going to work, and I had to start tutoring online. And then because I was tutoring online, I had to change the age, and I had to start working for an online school, which I there are good days and there are bad days. You know, being a teacher, being a student right now is really hard. So of course, being a teacher is a
it's,
mess.
yeah.
No one wants to be there. No one's learning anything. I know it's not effective. They know it's not effective, and we're still just wasting our time, you know, doing it. Um, so that was definitely a rough thing that, at least for me personally, I was like, everything has finally started to work out. I can see my future. Like, you know, I was like, oh, and I have a savings now, and I was getting excited. I'm like, I'm going to have enough money to have a kid soon. And then Corona happened, and now I'm like, okay, I'm poor again. That's fine. No kids, I guess. Um, and our
It's,
wedding, we were supposed to get married in May, and our wedding got canceled because no one could fly here and because we weren't legally allowed to have the wedding.
and
And we kept just postponing it. And then we're like, you know what? Let's just get legally married. Let's leave it there. And then we'll figure out the party when we figure it out, you know?
nice.
The important thing is that we have each other and that we don't have
That is
Corona.
true.
You know, it really
That is
puts
true.
things in perspective. And one of the things that I really hope, and that I've been seeing at least here in Israel since we're sort of opening up, is that people are so hungry for affection and for connection with people now. You know, like
True.
I missed hugs so much. And it's such a simple thing,
A hug,
such
yeah.
a simple thing, being able to hug someone or be physically close to them. I'm like a touchy feely person. So when I talk to people, I like touch their shoulder or I touch their hand. And that's a thing, you know, that recently I haven't been able to
Hugs,
do.
hugs have been so underrated until Corona. So I
Now
feel like
people understand.
I feel, so coming back to topic, I feel like this was a really important one that I wanted to ask you. How do you feel being a teacher has shaped you to be an expectant parent?
So I'll just start with one I mentioned earlier, which is that since I was a kid, I wanted to be a teacher. So, and a huge part of that is because I was in a private school. And I had some incredible teachers, and they were incredible both because they were well-educated and wonderful people, but also because the school gave them resources and gave them proper pay so they could actually, like, you know, be good teachers, really have the time and the emotional stability to be there for their students and see them. So from a very young age, I was already like, I saw the power of what a good teacher can do. And the biggest thing more than anything is making a student feel seen. So from being a little kid, I wanted to be a teacher. And from then I worked in youth movements. I worked at a summer camp. I worked in like educational weekend programming at like a youth center. So from very young, even before I was doing jobs that were the basis for being a teacher, and also babysitting and stuff like that. And I used to have a list on my phone called When I Have Kids. And it was, I would learn things from being a counselor. I would learn things from, I would babysit, and I would see a nighttime routine that a parent would have with their children. And I would be like, that is beautiful. That is such a great way to like have a moment with your child. And I kept all these things. I wrote them down because I was like, these kind of things will definitely be useful for when I have kids. And being a teacher more than anything, I think, has given me the idea of how important it is to be proactive about things. They teach you in class, in teachers college, there's something called class management, which is a very simple concept. It's just, you know, you have students that are learning in class, but they're also interacting with each other. Things are going to go wrong, and you have to have a structure in place for when those things happen.
True.
When a kid is talking, when a kid is disrespecting another kid, you need to know already what your reaction is going to be to that. And they need to know what your reaction is going to be. They need to know the consequences and also positive things that are going to happen when they do a good job. It's like a very simple concept, but that was something that I've really been reflecting on, especially in the past few months when I'm thinking about how in the next year I'd like to have kids. This idea of like, before I have kids, I want to be prepared for, obviously you can't be fully prepared for having a child, but you can be prepared for the kind of attitude and lessons that you want them to learn from the beginning. So definitely being a teacher has given me a strong idea of the kinds of things that students need to learn, because being a teacher, especially in an Israeli school, these students come to class, and I don't want to insult their parents. I think that it's very much a cultural thing as well, but these students do not understand how to talk to each other, how to respect each other. They haven't been taught that other people's needs are just as important as them, as theirs are. And I think that specifically because I went to a private school and because I, you know, then studied as a teacher, I'm very aware of other people. And that's something that's important to me. I want my child to be kind and respectful. And that doesn't come from punishing them or from anything. That comes from showing them, them different perspectives, from reading stories that have those kinds of messages, from modeling that yourself, from taking them and hanging out with kids that maybe they wouldn't have thought to originally, you know, like from different social classes or anything like that. So there's definitely a lot of lessons that I feel like are important to teach your kid that we just take for granted as adults. We just
assume that they would eventually learn that. Yeah,
but you forget that someone taught you to listen. Someone taught you to empathize. You don't remember it because you're an adult, but that's not something that necessarily comes naturally. Someone needs to bring your attention to other people's needs. Otherwise, you're never going to see them. And especially during all this Corona stuff, the reason that I was having some issues with my friends is because not following the regulations to me felt like not respecting other people, putting your needs above other people's needs. And it made me very aware of like, well, what kind of child do I want? I want a child that cares. And that, as much as it is a wonderful thing, is also something that's really difficult, as I've explained about me coming to Israel and being someone that cares a lot about other people and how people talk to each other, but that's not necessarily the culture.
Yeah.
So I'm still like, you know, iffy about how I'm going to actually get these things done. But definitely as a teacher, like I already have like at least a full notebook of
That's awesome.
things that I want to do with my children. And there's small things, as much as just like, you know, letting my child, for example, just in terms of like gender, dress and act and be whoever they want. I have this real issue with like gender reveal parties and all that kind of stuff.
I
I
get
think
that.
also in Israel, a lot of things are very gendered because the language is gendered, you
Mm.
know? So it creates a larger divide. So it's like something like very simple, tiny things that I think, you know, when parents read like all those baby books before their baby's born, and it's all kind of about how to keep your baby alive and healthy. And what you also need to be doing is planting the seeds for what kind of personality they're going to have, how they're going to look at the world, not just about keeping them alive. Although it's very important to keep them alive, and I'm not not undermining how much of a challenge that is. I'm just saying that, like, especially as being a teacher that's come into a class, and the way that I've acted has let the children have an idea of how they can treat me.
Mm.
And once you make that impression, it sticks. You're stuck with it for the rest of that time. If you let your child think that it's okay to push, like that you're a pushover when they're 2, then just wait till they're a teenager. You are going to be
Wow.
anyways, yeah. Children
Speaking
can
of
be
that,
wonderful. They can also be very difficult.
I get that, but I had a question to ask you was like, speaking of like, if you show your kid that you're a pushover, you said, so what kind of image do you think that parents should have in front of their kids? Do you think that, because I feel like most of us have this impression, at least till we are kids, of our parents as superhuman. And then ultimately that impression doesn't necessarily break, but the I would say the intensity of that impression reduces over time, to the point that you are a bit disappointed of
A
seeing
little
how,
disillusioned.
or
Yeah.
disillusioned about seeing how normally human they are than how you felt they were. I'm not blaming the parents, but I just feel like
Yeah.
that's a natural instinct of most parents to do so. So I feel like there are two sides to this. Either you can be honest with your kid and say that, hey, like mom and dad, we are human, we have our issues. Like, be clear about why you're angry. Don't have like misplaced anger, and be like, okay, I'm shouting right now at someone or something because of this. I'm angry. Or if you're crying, it's okay for your kid to see you crying, to express emotions and explain that I had a tough day at work, honey. So I am crying because of that.
Yeah.
So I think that teaches the kids to be more open and to understand, if because their parents are the first basic human beings, first social people they're ever going to be with.
Yeah.
So if they have an open sense of how and why the parents are reacting in a way, I feel like that's better. But I want to know, like, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like parents should still have that impression that they can do everything, or like they should also imbibe the thing, like nowadays, especially in this generation of instant gratification? I'm just going to take a minute before you respond, but I feel
Yeah.
like we live in an age of instant gratification where you post a picture, you're instantly gratified with a like or a comment. And that goes to anything. You go to work, you're instantly gratified by saying that, okay, you did good work. Like, it's short-term work and you're instantly gratified. You go to school, you're instantly gratified with grades. You're like, okay, that's a confidence builder, but that also I feel is a crutch in the long run, because when you're not instantly gratified for other stuff, you kind of depend on all sorts of things which might not be good for you to gratify you. And so I feel like in this age, it's really important if you're raising a kid. Like, I have no clue about this. I just got really interested in the topic, and I thought I should
Yeah.
ask you about this because you're an expectant mother. And so I want to know what you think about this.
So I would say, just in general, and also this opinion is both shaped by like the kind of person that I am, but also the way that my parents were. my parents, I'm a part of a four sibling, like four children family, but the first two kids and the last two kids have a huge gap between them. So I'm 26, my sister's 24, and my older siblings are 41 and 39.
Wow.
So my parents' parenting style changed dramatically between my older siblings and between us. And I think the biggest change was, like, first off, they were more financially stable. So there was less stress in the house and things were calmer. And it meant that my parents could be more open about just things. There were less problems. So they could be more open about how they were feeling about things because they were less stressed out. Whereas it was very, very different for my older siblings. And in general, the way that I grew up, I'm the kind of person that, like, I just believe that communication is the most important thing in the world. In any context, communication is the most important thing in the world. And being open with kids, I think there's definitely a line. I 100% agree with you about, you know, not letting your kids think that you're like Wonder Woman and being able to do all these things and whatever, because modeling weakness lets your children see that it's okay to have a hard time. And it's also lets them feel comfortable opening up to you. So I 100% agree with that. I will say that, like, definitely, especially for certain ages, as much as it's important to be open and honest with your kids, I think that there is a line about how much emotional struggles you want to expose your child to. Okay. You know, like when we talk about, for example, like children of divorced parents, can be really difficult for them because they have to watch all of that happen. They watch their parents' relationship fall apart. They feel it coming. And in that sense, I think that there is a line that you have to have where you are open and honest with your children. You let them know that having emotions is okay. And I think also a big thing for me is also answering questions honestly. Like, when I deal with children, even in my class, and a student's like, oh, why are you, like, what, why aren't you answering my question yet? Like, why are you answering my question? Like, I have a question. I completely understand that you have a question. I'm a little overwhelmed for a second. I just need to breathe because there's, I'm having a hard day. Just give me like 1 second, or even just pausing and being like, I know that you have a question, but you see that Jonathan also has a question, and you've asked so many in this lesson. I want to give him a chance. Is that okay? Do you mind if I give him a chance? Wouldn't you like me to also give him the respect that I give you? So I think that, like, a big thing is, like, parents make decisions and they don't explain them. Kids don't understand why they're not allowed to do something. So they just want to keep doing it. If you explain to the kid, obviously they're still children, it depends on the age, but if you explain and you treat them not like adults, but like people that have brains, then oftentimes it really does help them grow and it helps them understand. So a huge reason why I think that I'm very lucky to be quite understanding of other people is because I grew up with a younger sister, and I constantly, we'd always have fights. We're 2 years apart. And my mother learned that, at the end of the day, there isn't going to be someone that's right. Just understand each other's perspectives. Just be understanding, like Tess, why are you upset? Okay, because Bree made you feel a certain way. But Bree didn't mean to make you feel like that. So Bree, talk about what you were going through. And then it puts things back in perspective, and it lets you understand stuff instead of just judging things from the beginning. So in that sense, I think it's really important for parents to be open, both about their own issues and their own feelings, and also their kids. I know that, like, my child is going to get the sex talk whenever they bring it up. I'm not going to lie to my kid. Why? And that's because I also grew up. I don't remember when I had the sex talk because I was so young, and it became so normal, and I'm happy that it happened that way. So in that sense, I think that, like, at least for me personally, like, when I'm going to be a parent, I need to be open with my child because they need to know that they can be open with me. Yeah. It's a thing about modeling how to behave, and also because ultimately, like, lying is bad. And especially for children, there's like a certain age, I would say it's around 4, where kids like creativity really starts to
Gross,
like
yeah.
really, really grows. And it's a common age when children start lying a lot. And it's not because they're actually trying to be malicious, it's because the line for them is becoming blurred.
True.
And I think that if honesty is the standard in your house, then already it becomes very clear when something is a lie and when something is just like make believe. You know, I think more than anything, if you are open with your kids will be open with you.
Nice. That's
If you're going to create
amazing.
a place that, because that's what I have. Like, I am way too open with my parents, like way too open with my parents. My dad and I talk about everything. I talk to my parents a few times a week. Obviously, I'm also like long distance, so you have to keep up that relationship. But it's made me have such a healthy relationship with them and with myself, because there were a lot of moments, you know, there's a lot of moments when you're a kid where you could feel shame about normal stuff. I think that like just a good example is just like puberty. Just like developing as a sexual being, I think is like such a rocky and confusing and uncomfortable time for people. And a huge part of it is like this weird shame that exists in society. And that shame didn't exist in my house. It just didn't. So when I got my first period, when I was thinking about having sex for the first time, I just talked to my mom. And it stopped, you know, it saved me from so many problems that other friends had because they didn't feel comfortable opening up to their parents. So they didn't have someone to be able to give them some of the knowledge from experience that we just don't have as kids. Yeah. So if anything comes from this, I would just be like, communication is literally the most important thing in every single relationship that you can have. And if you are open, then that will create an atmosphere where whoever you're interacting with feels more open. And I think that that's the kind of children that we need in the world, you know?
We need more.
Especially with the whole thing you were talking about, social media and the instant gratification. It's also this idea of presenting that everything's fine. Everything's fine. I'm doing great. Oh, look how much fun I'm having here. Look how much fun I'm having here. Like, and it's not a lie, but we're not showing the difficult things that we're going through.
It's not the complete truth either. So
yeah,
it's more focused.
during this whole corona, my Instagram has been empty because I'm just like, you all know I'm not doing anything.
True. So I feel like it's more to do with the fact that this is also the norm on social media. This is my view personally, but you post more of the good things than actual stuff that you're going through. So, and a lot of times when you're out experiencing or having a wonderful experience, it can be anything. You're more focused on how you would present it on your own social media than actually remembering it or like relishing the experience of the entire thing. And so I feel like it has also, Corona has taught people to just not give anything about social media and what others think. Because when you spend so much time with yourself, this is my own personal experience, when you spend so much time with yourself, you realize that a lot of things that you think were issues are just over here. Like, it's not something that you're actually, like, you could have an hour's argument with someone you have, like a relative or like your partner or someone, and that's just going to be in your head. That person's completely fine with you, and you just had an entire argument with them in your head, and next time you're going to talk with them, interact with them, it's just so heated and they have absolutely no clue why. So
yeah, but I think also that comes back to communication.
That does come back to communication with anyone.
I am like, if I were to do a TED talk on anything, it would just be on the power of communicating and being vulnerable and open with people, and how you should always just like risk being honest and risk connection. Like, I think, I've had a hard time recently, and you would ask me and I would be like, yeah, I'm having a really shitty day. having a really hard time emotionally. I'm having a hard time going through this. I'm going through this. And the fact that I'm acknowledging it makes me feel like I have control over the situation.
True.
There's no shame in having a hard day. And I think that a bit Corona has normalized that. You know, people are suddenly like, oh, I understand people that have anxiety and people that
Yeah.
feel isolated and people that go through depression. I understand these basic things that maybe because I'd never been in that perspective, I never had a reason to really pause and like pay attention to how I'm processing things, to how I'm feeling things, not just like what's happening. That makes sense.
That actually does make a lot of sense, because I also feel, speaking on like vulnerability, I feel like a lot of us feel like if we are vulnerable, it's kind of like a weakness. Like if
Mm-hmm.
you're vulnerable with someone or something, like it can be a group too. Like if you're vulnerable with anyone, you're just showing how weak you are. And I feel like that has a lot to do with how we are made to think in a certain way, especially, I'm not trying to generalize, but especially the male side of the human population is more, made to think from the
Yeah.
time that they're born. They're always told, don't cry like a girl, or don't do this. Like, why you being a girl?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that is so wrong, because it's just the, like, it's not consciously done. Like if you, it's not just at that age, even when you're a teen or you're 20, like the songs that we have, or the, magazines or something that we see, like the thing usually comes with get the girl, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And we're already thinking of the female gender as something lesser or more of like a commodity, and we are not consciously doing it. It's just something that we are made to think in that sense. And I feel like that comes down to ultimately not being open, because when I'm being honest, when I'm talking with my guy friends and they're like, okay, you're talking too many emotions, like stop being a girl. And I'm like, that's not being a girl, that's being human. Like you're human, you have emotions.
Yeah.
It's okay to talk about them. And I feel like there's a lot of stereotype based on this. And I remember watching a few talks about how people understand, like there is an actual sense of toxic masculinity, like toxic in the sense that it's as bad
Yeah.
for you, like as something would be hazardous to your health.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like it's more like something that everyone should be open with. And I would personally like to uh, talk about Justin Baldoni. Have you heard of him?
About who?
Justin Baldoni. So he's
No, I
this
haven't.
guy, he's this actor, director, and an amazing guy who recently came out and gave a TED talk on how it's okay to be open as a man. And so I watched his stuff and I was like, this is so interesting, because this is not something that
Mm-hmm.
usually guys talk about. And I also feel like there is a sense of it. Like if you talk about feminism and everything, it is so sensitive to talk about it. Like either way, you talk about masculinity or like feminism, and it's so uh, you don't really want to talk about it, but because it might get
Mm-hmm.
awkward or you might be too sensitive, and you're like, I'm not gonna approach the topic. But I
Yeah.
feel like in this age where everyone's trying to be open and honest, like people should be okay with having a talk about it with their own friends and their like social circles and stuff. So
Yeah. I truly like, obviously I'm a woman, so it's different. But I 100% get what you're saying because I see it from the perspective of a teacher. I see how we are kind of like putting this, okay, in general, in schools, there's this general idea or cultural thing. I'm not sure if it's just in Israel and Canada, because I've seen it in both, where girls are just supposed to be more well behaved, just in
okay,
general.
okay,
Um, and it really creates, in my opinion, it's not just unfair for the girls, it's really unfair for the boys. I'm like, you're really like not undermining, what's it called? Underestimating. You're really underestimating these kids. You tell, if you're not gonna hold the guys to the same standard as you're holding the girls, then you're really limiting the guys, because you're robbing them of a lesson of how to be able to like learn and be respectful. And I think so much of what you're saying is both something that's just in our culture, in the world culture in general, that there's this idea that guys are not supposed to be sensitive, they're not supposed to open up, they're not supposed to whatever. But at the end of the day, yes, you still have feelings, and you still have emotions, and you're still struggling with whatever your problems are. The difference is that you're not acknowledging those feelings. And I completely get what you're saying about the toxic masculinity. And I think that that's also where it comes back to like the culture at home. Because my dad is very like alpha male, Israeli. He's definitely a product of his times, and also a product of it's crazy to me that if you go a few generations up, you get to people that like used to beat their kids. So like my grandfather used to like beat the shit out of my dad.
Wow.
And I feel like, when you get to there was a point where that was acceptable, where that was okay. And my dad would never like raise a hand to any of us, but he definitely has this idea of like what it means to be a man, and how men are supposed to take care of you, and also by extension what it means to be a woman. So when I was younger, I remember when I first started to swear, my dad hated it. And I was like, I understand that you don't want me to swear, but I'll make an effort not to, because it's not respectful. And he said, no, it's because words like that shouldn't be coming out of a woman's mouth.
Oh, okay.
And then I said, you know what? Fuck that shit, Abba. That is not a good reason. That's not a good reason. That's a gendered thing. And I know that I have one brother. We were 3 girls and 1 boy. And having a father like that and having a vibe like that in the house definitely affected my brother. When he was younger, he really wanted to do ballet. He wanted to do ballet so badly.
Oh my God.
And my mom like took him with like his best friend was our next door neighbor. She was a girl, and my mom took her and him to a lesson together, and he loved it. And my dad was like, there's no fucking way that my son is doing that. And my dad took my son to hockey instead. And back then they didn't know about like left-handed, right-handed kind of stuff. So my brother hated hockey because he was left-handed and he was playing with all the right-handed stuff. He absolutely hated it, and ended up quitting. And years later, he's been through rehab and he's been through all sorts of things, that a huge part of it came from the fact that he had emotions that he wasn't allowed to acknowledge. So he was drinking instead, and I think that it's obviously like and just to be clear, my brother's doing really well now. He's been sober for 2.5 years, which is why I know it's okay and feel comfortable talking about this kind of stuff. But I think a huge part of it is like, obviously it's a cultural thing that exists outside of the home. This is why I keep saying, like, let's be proactive about our kids. Think about what you want to teach your kids. Think about how you act. Think about your own ideas of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. And then start breaking those down, because it's all a construct. It's all a social construct. None of it is real. It's all a spectrum.
At the end of the day, it just matters if you're a good human being. So
exactly. So I definitely think just having a home life where like you're allowed to acknowledge your feelings is really important. And also just like, I think one good thing, and I can say this at least for like Yaniv, is that I came from a house that was very communicative because of my mother. Okay. And he came from a house that really wasn't. He has a dad like my dad, but worse. Oh. And Yaniv is also the only boy out of 3 girls. Mm-hmm. So the difference with him is that like seeing the way that his dad was and the way that his dad modeled being male really made Yaniv not want to be like that. And it's one of the reasons why he is so kind and quite sensitive now. But it took us a long time, like between just our relationship, for him to realize that it's okay to be vulnerable and it's okay to be sensitive and it's okay, all these things, that there's all these rules floating around, just fuck them. They don't really exist, And when you talk about hanging out with your friends and they say, oh, like, you're being so girly, all these emotions, whatever, that's when you I'm not going to say get new friends, but that's when you know, make an effort to have conversations with those friends one-on-one to make it
Yeah,
clear that if they want to open up, they can. And you're
they
never going
can.
to say,
Yes,
oh, that's just some girly shit. You know, and
true.
we have to create our own spaces because it's very, very difficult to change the culture of the world. And
Yeah,
ultimately, like, that's the biggest thing. Like, when I keep thinking about being a parent, I'm just like, I know that I cannot control what happens in school. I can't control what happens when they're with their friends. All I can do is give them the tools
yeah.
to know that they're allowed to be who they want. They're allowed to feel how they feel. And when they come home, to know that that's a safe space. Because for me, when I was a kid and I was getting bullied and I was going through all this shit, home was the one space where I was like, I can be me and I can be
That is very true.
comfortable. And that's definitely, yeah, that's when I look forward to being a mom, I really look forward to like knowing that Yaniv and I will accept our kid no matter
No
what,
matter what.
and that the world is slowly going in that direction. You know, like slowly, but every generation we're a little bit more understanding, a little bit more seeing, we're
Compassionate
more aware of other
and
kinds
kind.
of, yeah. I think also just the fact that we have the internet, obviously there's a lot of like negative stuff out there and there's a lot of people not being able to share, to be open, but there's also a lot of campaigns from the other side of like, hey, toxic masculinity is a thing. Hey, depression is a thing. You
True.
know, like anxiety is real.
Like
Like
a
so
lot
many,
of these issues are really not underrated, like especially because it's treated as something that is just made up, like by especially kids of this generation, as most people would like to say, like it's just made up. It's not a real thing that you're going through. But I'm glad that this has brought it up, that this is something that it's not just we can go through. It can be anyone of any age. They can go through. You never know it. So it's important that
yeah.
there's an open and safe space for everyone to talk about it and to understand what they're going through so that they can deal with it better at the end of the day. Because no matter where you seek help, it can be your therapist, it can be uh, your friends or anything. Ultimately, you're healing yourself. And so if you
Mm-hmm.
know what you're dealing with, you can heal yourself better. And so, yeah, Tess, it's been amazing to have this session with you. Thank you so much. I just would like a quote from you at the end of it. Like, what's the advice you'd like to give everyone viewing this?
Okay, general advice I would just say, be open, be honest, be vulnerable. It's worth it,
Awesome. That's
really.
beautiful. That's beautiful. And I look forward to coming to your wedding. And I feel like that's the reason, like mysterious ways have planned that it got postponed and stuff, because you needed more guests. And
Yeah, I need more.
so I look forward to that, and all the best to you and Yaniv on being amazing parents. I know you're gonna be. You have nothing to worry about. You guys are amazing as it is. So thank you so much, and I look forward to having more podcast sessions. Like if I can, I'm trying to think that we could have like a group session with Yaniv too. Let's see. We never know.
That would be fun. I'll
That would
try. Well,
actually.
you know, I'm a very big talker, so maybe he should have his own. So I don't. So I don't.
Yeah, I know. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, guys. This has been the podcast. I hope you enjoy. And I just like to thank everyone viewing in. And I'd like to give out a shout out to Yes Theory, because they introduced me and Tess and so many other amazing people across the globe that I wouldn't have possibly come to know. And through this, we have also come to have amazing friendships. And so also my shout out to Jay Shetty, who inspired me to start a podcast, and Justin Baldoni especially. And I would recommend this to you. You guys should see the movie called 5 Feet Apart and Clouds, because these are some movies that is a definite recommend. And Tess, you should watch it too, because it makes you deal with emotions that you didn't know you had hidden inside. Like that's been my experience. And Justin Baldoni is one of the main reasons why I got inspired. And I've several times when I was talking with you, I was just paraphrasing what he said about toxic masculinity. And because I feel like that's a very important issue that everyone needs to face before it becomes an issue at the end of the day for them eventually. And so shout out to everyone and thank you so much, everyone. And see you guys next time. Bye.